Across the UK, one group of birds is synonymous with our waterways and wetlands, the swans. They are some of our most charismatic and cherished native animals. But as we continue to develop the landscapes around us, we are creating life-threatening obstacles for the swans. WWT are bringing people together to help these beautiful birds. One of the biggest problems facing swans in the UK is collisions with power cables on their daily flights to and from their feeding grounds.
Although they have fairly good eyesight, when they're flying, which tends to be at dusk and dawn when the light isn't particularly good, they can't really see these power cables that well. And because the swans are very fast flyers, fly at around 45 miles an hour, they can't get out of the way of those power cables when they see them at the last minute.
A dedicated team have begun the task of monitoring the daily flight paths of the swans to see how they are affected by these power lines.
So what we want to do is be able to map the extent of where swans are feeding and roosting, what their flight lines are, and if there's any immediate sort of reactions to the power lines. The swans are a long-lived species, so if you take one reproducing swan out of a population that's going to breed for another 8 years, that's quite a big effect. Basically, I'm hoping that we'll be able to build up a map of the local area that has all the features of the landscape in it and the flight lines of the swans, so we'll be able to say, if you're going to put a new power line in, what are the chances of swans flying into them?
Fortunately for the swans, WWT are working with energy companies in an attempt to try and minimise the frequency of these collisions.
We're trialling a number of new bird diverters on the power line to research what is most effective, where best to place the bird deflectors, and which type of deflector is the most effective to use on the network. The new type that we're trialling on this line also glows in the dark, so particularly low light conditions in the morning or at dusk in the evening or in misty conditions, the deflector actually glows. As well as glowing, it also spins and moves around in the wind, so it's much more visible to the swans as they're approaching the line.
The swans colliding with power cables is a nationwide problem, and hopefully this project that we're doing is going to be able to give us guidelines and the best practice for what we can carry out throughout the UK. So if you do see a swan colliding with a power cable, the first thing you should do is contact the RSPCA, because they'll be able to deal with that bird and get it back to health if they possibly can.
The RSPCA work tirelessly to deal with injuries to all sorts of animals, but swans are some of their most frequent visitors.
We get all three species of swans that are found in the UK, although Hooper swans and Buick swans obviously only in the winter and in very small numbers. We will get the same individuals in several times in their lifetime sometimes, quite often for completely different problems, sometimes for the same ones. We put BTO rings on all of the birds that we release just to see if we can get some sort of data back on how well they integrate back into the wild. There are various schemes, such as colour ringing schemes, where the rings are a lot more obvious and the general public can read them in the field.
These rings aren't just useful for following the fortunes of swans in the UK. They can also be used to monitor them along the migration routes, like the hoopers that arrive every year from Iceland.
So we were just driving along the road here, we noticed this white object in the field, and as we came over to inspect it, it turned out to be a hooper swan, and so therefore we were checking it for rings. So it hasn't got any rings, but if you look above me, you'll notice that these power cables, and this is most likely that the bird has flown into these and died.
But it is not just power cables that threaten the lives of swans across the country. Many of the swans that come to the RSPCA are suffering from different problems entirely.
We still get a lot of lead-poisoned birds from lead that's in the waterways historically. They have territorial disputes and get injuries from those. Crash landings on wet roads as well is quite a common one.
And when the swans do end up in the middle of a busy road, the first on the scene need to know how to deal with these large and unpredictable birds.
Once you get a swan on a motorway, you've got cars travelling at 80, 90 miles an hour, and you can quite quickly have severe problems. So the police are often the first to attend these situations and will often end up closing the motorway. So what we started to do with the police is to actually train them so that they're able to handle these birds and actually remove the birds safely and get the road open for people as well. And if the police are able to do this quickly, it's much safer for the birds and also the public. So the police come here, we give them training and enable them to go out and keep our roads safe and keep our wildlife safe as well. It's really important that if they do find a bird, they realise if it's injured or if it's in good condition, so they know whether to release it or not. And releasing the bird is also something that can be quite difficult. So we teach officers how to do that nice and safely, again, so that the bird doesn't get injured and is, for example, facing into the wind as it takes off, as an area of open water, etc. So we go right through any scenario that the officer might encounter, and all this is done in this kind of environment where the officers get to handle the birds firsthand and get to take these skills away.
From the police to local energy companies, WWT are bringing together organisations to help our swans, and you can get involved too. If you find an injured bird, contact the RSPCA to ensure that it will get the best possible care. By working together, we can ensure a bright future for our swans.